All right, joining me now here on the Matthew Filipowicz Show is Tim Shorrock. Tim is an investigative journalist whose work has been seen in The Nation magazine, Salon, Mother Jones, The Progressive, All in Which and more you can find at timshorrock.com. You can also find him on Twitter at Timothy S. Tim, thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you very much.
All right, so Tim, your latest for The Nation magazine is entitled Obama's Crackdown on Whistleblowers, and it specifically focuses on the prosecution of a group of men known as the NSA-4. Tell us, who exactly is the NSA-4?
These are four individuals who worked at the National Security Agency for a total together of about 120 years between them. And they worked at different levels, very senior levels. Tom Drake was one of them. He was working for the NSA at the senior executive level in the last period between 2001 and 2008. The other three were working primarily in like information services and computer sciences within NSA, developing programs, and of course the NSA intercepts communications coming into the country, does foreign intelligence of communications, and that's what they worked on. And so these four individuals came together around 2000, around that time, and filed a complaint with the Department of Defense Office of Inspector General about fraud, waste, and abuse at the NSA during their period. And their case involved a system which they had developed at NSA within their shop. It was a special research unit on signals intelligence, and they had developed a computerized system, automated system to analyze signals intelligence coming in from foreign countries and crossing into the United States, and analyzing these communications and emails on the internet that come in, very rapidly. And their system was being tested and seemed to work pretty well when it was tested. And it was a very, inexpensive $3 million project.
This was thin thread, correct?
This was called thin thread, right?
Okay.
And it involved, maybe at the maximum about a dozen employees and a few contractors. And in the fall of 2000, it began testing it. And then in 2001, in August or so, the director of NSA at the time, Michael Hayden, informed them and their team that their system would not be deployed at NSA, and instead the NSA was going with this very large contracted project that was called Trailblazer, that was supposedly set up to do the same thing, which was, intercept communications coming in at a very rapid rate. Their system was developed by four major defense contractors, and the final contract went to this one company called SAIC, and that eventually they spent billions of dollars on that system, and it ended up producing nothing but junk, really, and it was finally canceled in 2006. And what the NSA whistleblower said was that system was full of fraud, waste, and abuse, and that their system was working. And they filed this complaint with the Defense Department, which looked at it and came out with a report in 2005 that basically upheld their complaint and said they were correct. The NSA, in fact, was, wasting tremendous resources on Trailblazer and had ignored studies that made Thin Thread, the smaller program, look good, and they had suppressed those studies, in fact. That report was classified, and it was finally declassified 2 years ago. But after that was, that investigation took place, during that time, the New York Times blew open the story of the illegal NSA domestic surveillance program. And as your listeners recall, there was a sort of, huge internal investigation within the Bush administration and the government to who leaked, the story of the New York Times about the NSA, warrantless surveillance. And these individuals were caught up in that investigation. And so what happened was, they went and did their duty as citizens and as government employees and exposed wrongdoing at their agency. Yet their names were floated, and were finally the Justice Department and the FBI started investigating them. And in 2007, their homes were raided and their computers were seized, and they were charged with leaking classified information. And one of them, Tom Drake, was actually arrested, and he was charged with 10 federal felony counts, including 5 under the World War I Espionage Act, because of basically over his discussions with one reporter. And he was almost sent to jail for his life for basically, doing his duty and exposing fraud, waste, and abuse. And they have since their case began, they have taken to the public airwaves and to 60 Minutes and different publications and media outlets, and talked a lot about what they consider a massive illegal domestic surveillance operation by the NSA. My story is really the first. I call it the untold story of the NSA-4. My story really reveals the corporate corruption side of their story, which is what they actually blew the whistle on. So it goes into a lot of detail about how these contractors got to work and basically how they screwed it up.
I'm talking again to Tim Shorrock, a journalist for many outlets, including The Nation magazine. And so, again, the primary focus of your article is how, again, we had the NSA had developed a very cheap in-house program called Thin Thread that apparently was working, and actually when there's been tested when tests have been run on the intelligence that was there, they actually found, if I'm correct, that Thin Thread would have tagged 9/11 in advance. Is that at least that's what they're claiming, correct?
They claim that the information they could collect and the inputs they would put in at the beginning, if they did their analysis as this communications was flowing across telecom lines, upon interception, they did the analysis, and they would put in all kinds of numbers and names, and then they would create graphs to show relationships between callers. And they say that their system worked so well that they could have found the connections that were later NSA actually discovered that it had missed some communications that could have signaled the plan to attack the United States on September 11th, 2001. And they say their system, could have done that and should have been in place in the months and weeks leading up to 9/11. But instead, they say the NSA went with this expensive, huge contracted project, Trailblazer, which never produced, as I say in the article, never produced an iota of intelligence, and so never picked up anything. And that's what they're so angry about. And they actually say, this is something that the American people paid for on 9/11.
Yeah, and even more so, you write that Trailblazer, even though on every single solitary level, Trailblazer was a complete and utter failure, it actually sort of set the model that would be the privatization of national security post 9/11, correct?
Right. I mean, I wrote a book about this called Spies for Hire, about the vast outsourcing of U.S. intelligence, which, private contractors eat up about 70% of the entire intelligence budget. So, huge amounts of the money that we spend on, surveillance and covert operations and so on goes into these kinds of companies that contract with NSA, CIA, and, many other agencies. And so this market, of course, was there before 9/11, and there was around Washington, the Washington Beltway. There's hundreds, dozens of companies that conduct this kind of work for various intelligence agencies. But as we know, after 9/11, the budgets doubled, quintupled, and even more. And there was a vast amount of money spent thrown at basically intelligence agencies. And Trailblazer was a project that General Hayden, who ran the NSA, promised Congress this would solve and revolutionize our signals intelligence, and they wanted to they wanted to stop future plots, so they poured all kind of money into these kinds of projects. And this one, unfortunately, never produced anything. And the total cost of it's probably well over $4 billion, just wasted. Wow. They had a program that actually could have worked.